everybody. Welcome to another Haas Talks FOSS. I'm the head of open source strategy, the Haas, here at Percona, Matt Yakovit. And today I'm joined by Vijay and Prasad from AWS to talk to me about all the fun things happening in AWS land and about them personally. How are each of you today?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Excellent.
So nice to meet you today, and then I'm excited to talk about all the features that we're working on, and then let's have a coffee together too.
Yes, indeed. And Prasad, how are things on your end?
That's awesome, and excited to be here with you.
Okay, excellent. So I am curious. I have lots of different folks on the show. I've had folks from AWS. I've had folks from the open source space, other database companies. And so, and maybe I'll start with you, Prasad. How did you get started, in the database space? I mean, what did that look like? Where did you begin your career here, and what got you interested specifically in databases themselves?
Yeah, my career goes, quite a number of years back. So I started as an application ERP CRM consultant.
Oh, okay.
So I was mostly doing the front end applications, ERP and CRM applications, but it's always to do with data, right? So how do you make sure the data is presented to customers in such a way, especially when you come to CRM applications, it's all about presenting the data in a way it's easy for the customers to find, whether you're presenting to salespeople, whether you're presenting to marketing people, or whether you're presenting it to manufacturing people. So I had that background, and then I spent a number of years at IBM working in the database space, both on, RDBMS in terms of DB2 or in the big data portfolio of IBM. So had a number of years of background in that space, and excited to be part of the journey here at AWS with RDS.
So, it's interesting. So I hear big data. Everybody has a little bit different version of big data. IBM's version of big data is probably very different than other people that I know's, version. Maybe define for us your definition of big data, because it's one of those things that everyone treats a little differently. Everyone says, big data is a little bit of a different thing. I'm curious, in your experience, what have you seen out there that is, quote unquote, big data? Is it just a lot of data, or is it unstructured data? Maybe give us a bit of insight into that.
Great. So to be precise, I was part of the Hadoop or journey at IBM.
Okay.
So if you put on that lens and look at the big data, it's everything that you mentioned, right? So it is structured data, unstructured data, streaming data, data at rest, what do you call NoSQL data, any type of data, right? So data is data, are just files, but you want to mix them all together. So what I used to think about it is having my background in CRM world. For example, I was with this company. I was an architect, trying to help the support group, right? So when a customer calls, the support guys will look up the accounts. At that time, it was great when I provided them a bird's eye view of the account. So customer A is calling, right? So what are the products they bought? What are the tickets they have raised with you? What are the opportunities that are pending? Bringing this data together itself was so awesome at that point.
Yeah, and it's so critical for that now, because everybody has so many disparate systems, right? It's no longer just a single database. When I started, I did Oracle. We had the Oracle database in the back. It was as opposed to the, many. And then it eventually grew, but still now it's 20 different sources, 100 different sources, and they all have to come together at some point.
Yeah, and then it gradually, improved to, hey, I'm going to add more richness to this data. So now I'm going to incorporate the weather data, the social media data, etc. And then it started getting into the sentiments of the customer. And then, like, for example, you have your insurance companies now, right? So
Yep.
multiple insurance companies, they all know your driving history. They all know how many tickets you got. They all know what activities you are up to. And now their premium is based upon all those data. So these are all like richness of data that is coming from multiple sources, not just a single source. And that's what big data enables you to put together information from so many disparate sources.
Yeah, and it's both great and frightening at the same time because there is so much data out there. We've become digital pack rats a little bit where everyone wants to keep everything, regardless if they need it or not. They might not know why, but in the future, they might see a reason. And that means that not only are we getting more data in more different places, we're getting bigger data, right? Like bigger systems, bigger, systems of record, which is a challenge in and of itself. And Vijay, I don't want to leave you off of this conversation. Maybe tell us a little bit about your background. Right now you're working as a solution architect at AWS, but how did that come about? Where did you start? How did you get involved in databases?
Oh, I started my database journey like 15 years ago and started with SQL Server.
Okay.
So been with SQL Server for a while, around like 12 years with SQL Server. I've been with SQL Server version, a pretty old version, 6 all the way up to the 12 versions, right? SQL Server 12 and 14. So that's how I started my journey and worked for various different customers throughout this SQL Server journey. I did a consulting work. I did with Southwest Airlines, I worked with Blue Cross Blue Shield, I worked with Verizon customers. I worked with multiple customers, right? That's how I started my journey. And then with AWS, I started my journey as a cloud support engineer. And then because of this unique experience that I have with all the databases that I have, then I happen to support the SQL Server at AWS, and then slowly transition myself with, if you know one relational database, you mostly know all the relational databases. All the technology behind the scenes are same. So you have a data file, log file, they work the same. So the features are different. The way you access is different, right? So slowly, I started learning MySQL and Postgres open source engines while I was working as a cloud support engineer. And then immediately I became a SME in MySQL. So I started enjoying MySQL open source database engines, and then have both versions of MySQL and Postgres versions of open source I got exposed to and started loving them. So that's how I started, and slowly transitioned into a solution architect and solving problems with the customers.
Oh, very cool. And while there are similarities, the difference between MySQL and SQL Server, there are differences, and that's not always an easy journey to make that transition, because you scratch your head and you go, why did they do it this way? This just doesn't seem right.
Yes.
Like I'm kind of expecting this to work and it doesn't. So I get that journey. I started as an Oracle and SQL Server DBA and kind of transitioned into the open source 15 years ago. So it's been a while for me as well, but I do know that there does take some getting used to, and there is a learning curve. So, so kudos to you for being able to pick that up and go that route. Now, what's really interesting is your journey through the customer space and working with customers, helping to resolve issues. And this is one of the favorite topics that I have with talking with, the folks here at Percona. We have our own support staff, consultants. Mm-hmm. I always like to hear about hey, what are we seeing the customers, struggling with? What are the topics that, maybe we wish that we could educate customers on or help them with, whether it's new software or new tooling, or just please don't do this thing anymore, right? I say that a lot. I go out there and I beg them. I go, please, pay attention to your data types. Please don't neglect these indexes. But they don't listen. Exactly. But maybe if I get enough people to say similar things, they will listen. So are there things that you're seeing in that customer space that are starting to evolve that are really important and critical that either you're trying to address, or you would like to tell people, hey, you might want to look into this thing, or avoid this problem?
My journey with it's a little different the way I see at the customers, right? So the customers that I handled while I was working as a support engineer, customers are pretty good. They know about databases. Some customers are learning, adopting because they don't want to deal with the databases. They only want to concentrate on their business. So you have like different kind of customers, right? So whenever you have a customers who already know about the databases, right? Their challenges are totally different. They want to do something scaling activities. They want to do something totally different. Some customers I see, they're new to the database world and they really don't want to handle those databases. They just want their business to run. So those kind of customers, you need to educate them, right? You have to be patiently tell them, hey, there is a difference. I know you are dealing, but there are some things you need to still take care of. When you are creating tables, right? You need to take care of the data types that you're using or the indexes that you're creating. Don't just blindly create hundreds of indexes on a single table. That is going to impact the performance as well. So I know it is going to improve, but it is also going to impact the performance. So these kind of things I normally used to see customers. So two different set of customers I have seen.
Yeah. And so it's interesting having both of you on different backgrounds, right? So the big data space for Prasad and you for MySQL SQL Server. I don't know if you're familiar with Facebook's internals, but they have a lot of MySQL. They have a lot of, relational systems. And I always found it funny, the team there that manages these, petabytes worth of relational databases, because big data has been taken. They call themselves the small data team, even though it's petabytes of data, right? So they're like, we're part of the small data team, but it's bigger than anybody else's systems out there. And I think that, you mentioned, Vijay, that there's kind of two different customers, and I've experienced this as well. There are those who are very keen and understanding of the database, and they know exactly what they want. And they tend to be able to handle most things on their own. So they're looking for, the guidance, but they'll just go off and once you tell them, like, point them in the right direction, they'll just go. But I find that where I think the biggest battleground for all of us in the database space going forward is really more on the other group, which is, I'm so busy. I want to focus on developing my apps. Right. I don't want to worry about availability, or I don't want to worry about performance. I don't want to worry about these things. I just want it to work. And, a lot of times they make some mistakes in the design, which cause scalability issues later on. But this is where I think that there's a lot of tooling and automation and things that are out there that are starting to help try and overcome and cater to them. And that's one of the cool things about RDS and Aurora is it enables a lot of those folks who might not want to do that to get a basic to start and to kind of progress in the right way, right? So it gives them something that's easy to start with, and then they can progress at their own pace and their own skill level and grow into that. And I know both of you are going to be coming to Percona Live to talk about some of those new features, one of them being the multi-AZ. And so, those who aren't aware, you can do high availability, and you should, if you have a application you care about, in Aurora RDS. But what we're talking about here is the ability to have faster failover, better response time. It's a slight architectural change. So, Prasad, why don't you tell us a little bit about this change and what we're going to be seeing within the system?
Sure. So as you said, we introduced a new option for our existing multi-AZ feature. So the current multi-AZ feature was called multi-AZ with a single standby. And the new deployment option that we introduced is called multi-AZ with two readable standby instances, or multi-AZ DB cluster in short. So essentially, we are going from 2 instances to 3 instances, where the 2 standby instances are also going to be available for read workloads. So there are a couple of differences here. First one is in the multi-AZ with a single standby, the standby instance is not available for any reads or any kind of application access. It's just there as a active passive standby mode. In this newer option, you have 2 readable instances. As the name implies, they are available for read, so it's more of an active mode. In addition, we are providing two different cluster level endpoints, right? So there's one endpoint for write workloads. You can put write and read workloads on that endpoint. The other endpoint is strictly for read workloads, where the two readable instances, standby instances, will be load balanced and will be serving the read workloads. So that provides scalable read capacity for the cluster as a whole.
And Vijay, with that type of a setup, you've got applications, and when you're migrating applications, sometimes that read write split is difficult from an application perspective, because most applications they have a connection and it either works or doesn't. So are there some best practices or some things like, to kind of enable that read write split that makes sense here?
Yeah, definitely. So as Prasad pointed out, right, whenever you create this multi-AZ cluster with two readable standbys, by default, the RDS provides you two endpoints. In your application, you need to use these two endpoints. One is the cluster endpoint, which always points to the writer, right? In case of a failover, it is going to update that for you, and then you don't need to do any application changes at all if you use those cluster endpoints. And then if you have any workload that requires read activity, or then if you have like monthly reports or weekly reports, any other application that has this kind of activity, or your regular OLTP workload with some read activity, then you need to use the second endpoint, which is the reader endpoint, which points to both the read replicas within that cluster, and then it distributes the workload between those two readers in a round robin fashion. So you don't need to do anything, right? You just need to use that endpoint, and then way behind the scenes automatically distribute the load between both the reader instances, and then we will improve the read throughput, if you will, right? Behind the scenes, you can leverage the two reader instances. So all you need to do is just use in your application endpoint, make sure you use that reader endpoint for your reporting applications. And then as part of the Percona discussion, right, I'm showing this as part of the demo, right? We are showing this demo, how I used in a containerized application, how I use this cluster endpoint, reader endpoint, and then how you distribute the load between those two reader instances. That's what we are showing as part of the Percona live session.
Awesome. Now, I'm curious, one of the challenges, and I don't know how you approached or solved this, one of the challenges with the read-write splitting in most applications or most databases is the possibility that the replicas get out of sync. Is that something that you've spent some time trying to resolve, or is it still a best practice if you have something that is very time sensitive that you go to the primary?
Yeah, Prasad, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. As you said, we have two cluster endpoints. One is the writer and the reader, and the reader is serving the read workloads. But replica lag is a more important concept in this setup because of a couple of reasons, right? So we have the reader endpoint, which is serving the read workloads, but under the covers, it's also committing or writing transactions that is coming from the primary to keep all the instances in sync. So essentially, it is doing two types of activities while the write activity is hidden from the user. So this may cause replica lag under certain circumstances, which we need to be aware of, and so need to distribute the load accordingly. So for example, I'm having a lot of write transactions coming in, and at the same time, I'm trying to just overload the read replicas with tons of read workloads. So the read replica is going to be totally occupied. All the resources are fully occupied serving those read workloads, and it may not have enough CPU cycles to update the transactions that are coming from the primary. So that can cause a replica lag. The other instances are I'm serving the other way around, right? I'm serving normal read workloads, but I'm having a huge volume of concurrent transactions coming in from the primary that's trying to occupy more time. Final use case is I'm trying to do huge volumes of DDL statements, or doing a massive data upload into the primary. So all these could cause replica lags. It's important that we are aware of it, and in order to make sure that replica lag is within the tolerable limits, we have also added a mechanism that you can use to control the replica lag between the primary and the secondary instances. It is exposed, it's called flow control. It is exposed in terms of a parameter value that you can use to set what's the maximum tolerable limit. And once you hit that limit, this mechanism will kick in and start slowing down the transactions into the primary so the readers can catch up with the primary.
Oh, excellent. Cool. Very cool. So I'm curious. Now we'll move on a little bit here. So I am a nerd. I like technical stuff. I like to learn new technologies. So I'm curious. What sort of new things are you learning? I'll take your AWS hat off. Maybe it's something that you're excited about. I like to ask this question just because I like to learn myself. Sometimes people have some interesting technology I've never heard of, or they have some new thing that they're trying to implement or figure out. I can show you stuff that I've worked on recently, but Vijay, maybe tell me a little bit about, some of the things that you're interested in, that you're starting to learn, maybe get excited about, and then we'll go over to Prasad.
Yeah, definitely. So as you know, I already started my journey as a SQL Server DBA and then slowly transitioned into MySQL. Now I'm learning Postgres, which is enjoying that Postgres. The Postgres documentation is really good. The product is really good. So every day I try to learn, read, do some experiments with Postgres and try to learn how these things work here. What are these? So many extensions here. How are these extensions? Yes.
Lots of extensions. Yes.
Yeah. What are these extensions? Yes. So learning about those extensions and all those things. With that, myself, it's an individual interest, learning about, exploring about AI/ML services, how they are, as we talked about big data, right? So how these AI/ML services helping these big data, how to analyze these big data and all those kind of things. I kind of like try to write my own models to try to see how I can mostly analyze all this data that I have, and then how I can leverage these AI/ML services in our relational databases and how I can bring value to this relational database world. That's what I'm learning right now.
Excellent. Cool. And Prasad, what's going on? What are you interested in? What can you recommend to me to start thinking about?
So as we discussed earlier, I come from the database and big data world, but I am relatively new to AWS. And here I find we offer multiple databases, SQL Server, Postgres, Aurora, Oracle, MySQL, etc., so on and so forth. And it's interesting to see, understand the choices that the customers make. What are the nuances in which they are interested in choosing a specific database for their applications. And the second important aspect is the scale in which we need to operate, right? So we have tons of customers having so many different databases. They want them to be highly available and managed all the time. How do you manage all that? Is another important area that I'm looking into.
Oh, cool. Well, Vijay and Prasad, I want to thank you for coming on, chatting with me a little bit, helping me understand a little bit about both of you, talking a little bit about your Percona Live talk, sharing a little bit about what you're learning about, thinking about. I appreciate it. I appreciate you coming on and chatting with me today.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks for your time. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. And for those who are watching or listening, go ahead and subscribe, follow us, and come to Percona Live, where you can hear from Vijay and Prasad in person, which is always fun. It's good to see people virtually, but it's better to be in person. Wow, what a great episode that was. We really appreciate you coming and checking it out. We hope that you love open source as much as we do. If you like this video, go ahead and subscribe to us on the YouTube channel. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And of course, tune in to next week's episode. We really appreciate you coming and talking open source with us.